Our purpose for these sessions is the same every time. Our purpose is, number one, we're going to be looking at the components of balanced literacy. So that means we're going to be diving into readers and writers workshop, small group instruction, read alouds, word building instruction, and vocabulary instruction. And then also, the essential practices are the focus of everything that we do. So we're not going to be focusing on certain programming, although you might see examples from different things. Rather, we will be focusing on the essential practices and seeing how those are woven in. Our learning intention today is we're going to learn how to effectively incorporate small group and individualized instruction into that literacy block. And then also, we are going to show that we're able to do this by being able to articulate when to use small groups, touch base, and conferring with our students. Our outcomes, we're going to gain an applicable understanding of what balanced literacy is. And like we said after our first session, this is going to be something we are going to be growing and learning as we grow through all of these sessions. We started a discussion looking at the balances and weights of different things within our literacy block. And we're going to continue to have those conversations throughout. And then also we are going to be looking more in depth at your schedules and looking at your time constraints. We're going to be looking at your instructional beliefs, your daily practices, your schedules, and try to see how we can fit these different pieces in. And then we're also going to be really reflecting, refining on where we are in our practices and where we can go next. Our agenda seems very small, but it is not at all. Last time we went into Reader's Workshop, and actually we talked a lot about Workshop and looked at the different components in depth. So today when we look at Writer's Workshop, it is more or less an opportunity for you to get to see what that looks like and kind of compare those two things. However, they are the same thing, but with different, you'll see the different, different components are somewhat in there, although they're pretty much the same. So it's a brief conversation about Writer's Workshop today. But a majority of our time is going to be spent on this small group conferring and touching base section. And this is the piece that we are going to be focusing on, and it's the piece that you have a majority of the resources for in your folder today. If you have not connected to Google, please remember that all of these things are in Google. And for those of you that came in late, in our presentation, we have tons of links today, so you'll want to go back and kind of preview and look at the links that are in the presentation. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about Writer's Workshop. And some people weren't in here when I said it before. Please know this is going to be a lot of information, and I already joked with people last time if you were in this session. I'm a fast talker as it is, so today we're going to be really cramming in things. In your packets, the first thing that you have, just as a reminder, is our learning rounds for Reading Workshop. And what we did last time is we watched an example of Reader's Workshop, and we used this as kind of our guide to look at the components and to see what we noticed about what students and teachers were doing. This in here is just as a reference because we're going to be doing that with Writer's Workshop. So the second one that we have in there is for Writer's Workshop, and you will see that the components are the same. And so you are going to be looking for the same things today when we get to that point. And this is the same format that you can jot your notes in there about what you see the teacher doing and what you see the students doing. So this is the next sheet that we'll be referencing, just so you have that at your fingertips. For Writer's Workshop, if you take a look at the different components, you're going to see it's very similar to what we had talked about last time with Reader's Workshop. So our mini lesson, again, we're aiming for that 10-minute mark. When we tried to pick examples today, we try to pick examples that fall into that time frame. The one today, we lessened the time a little bit because we knew we had a lot to fit in. So that one ends up being a shorter, like 5-minute or so mini lesson, but really they fall within that 10-minute frame. For your independent writing time, it's usually, again, you have about 20 minutes to start, and then you're going to have that mid-workshop interruption again. You're going to have that time where you kind of stop and freeze everybody, bring back your goal or your strategy or what you did for the day to get everybody back on track, and then you will go back into your writing again. So then independent writing will take up another 20 minutes or so. Like we said, if depending on the grade level or your schedule, the timing might be a little bit different. And then at the end is going to be your share time. And this part is really important that we don't forget this, especially with writing, because I find so many times kids are so excited and invested into the things that we're writing, and we give them time to write, and then we put it away, and we might talk with them as a teacher, but they never get time to share it out with the group and to let other kids know what they're writing about and what they're thinking about. And so this share time is super important for your authors to be able to kind of have that author's chair piece and get to sit up front and talk about the things that they've been writing, and for a teacher to be able to take the time then and to use that as a mentor or an example of something that they've practiced during that independent writing time. So a lot of similarities to what we talked about last time. And so today we're going to watch an example. The examples that we watched before were from Teachers College, and so you saw one format of how they taped it. This one is not. This is a different example of a writer's workshop. This is going to be the mini lesson part of it that you'll be able to watch and see the components of. We decided to cut out the whole workshop piece because we just don't have time to watch the whole entire thing today. And so if you want to use your, whoops, that's okay. If you want to use your writer's workshop guide to help you to know the different things that you're seeing, please feel free to use this. These things, if they're not linked in, I will make sure they're linked in, because I had some coaches say to me that they would like to use these with teachers, and so I will make sure I start linking all of these in, so if you want to use them, you can.
Okay, my how-to writers, can I have everyone eyes on me? Jonathan and Deha, eyes on me. Put your sword to the side. Thank you. Yesterday, I was showing you what to do when you're done. Because when you're done, you've only just begun. And how-to writers revise by checking all their steps. Did I zoom in? Did I check all my high-frequency work? Did I add a tip? And I showed some of the boys and girls a tip yesterday when I was working with them. And today I thought that I would share it with all of you. Because when I was going back and I was rereading how to jump rope, then I was reading this part here. And it says, don't forget to wear good sneakers. And I thought, they're showing me a tip, so that way I don't get hurt. Because how-to writers, can I wear my high shoes and jump rope, or is that dangerous?
Dangerous.
So it's too dangerous for me to do that. So good thing they wrote here, don't forget to wear good sneakers. So that's a tip to remind me. And when I was reading to you about our monsters, even though this is fiction and it's fake, they still gave me a tip. Don't forget, hold his hand. Do not give him green lollipops. That is something very important to teach me. And just like here, they said another tip. Make sure the hoop is bigger than your monster. So they're giving the reader tips to make sure they remember. It was very important. So today I want to show you that. I'm going to go back to my shared writing that we did on how to play jump rope, and I want to see where I can add a tip to make sure my reader knows something very important. So watch how I go back and reread my shared writing so I can see, do I need a tip to show something very important to my reader? Hi friends, do you want to do something cool? Let's go outside and play jump rope. I think I need a tip there. Material, jump rope, and a person. No tips. Step 1. First, get the jump rope by the handle. And, let me add. First, get the, my turn. First, get the jump rope. My turn. Get the jump rope by the handle. And I can put here, because I put arrows here, Anthony, I can put a tip. And make sure you hold the ends tight. Because if I hold it loose, then I'm not going to be able to jump rope all the way. So here, I'm going to add my tip. First, get the jump rope by the handle. And, here's my tip. Make sure you hold the handle Did you see, Alyssa, how I was rereading my story and then I thought, where should I put my tip to teach my reader something very important? And I found a place here and I added it. So can you look at your how-to that you brought to the carpet and can you reread it? And can you think, where can I add a tip to teach my reader something important? Can you turn and talk to your partner? Turn and talk. And first, reread your story and see where you can add your tip.
So then after that, she dismisses them. They go back to work on their work and they start adding in their tip or their trick. And so what I want you to do is I want you to just take a minute and kind of look at any notes that you have. I want you to take a look and kind of think through those pieces. And if you need to refer back to the reader's one, that one is there in your folder as well. And what I want you to do is I want you to think, what are some connections that you have made between them? What are similarities? What are some differences? And just have a short conversation with your group about what are some of the noticings that you had. I heard a lot of comments about how the components were the same, and that's the important part to know and to be able to bring back in to tell teachers. I think one of the hardest things is that when we're talking to teachers at school, when we're bringing information back, when we talk about writer's workshop and reader's workshop, and if you're doing math workshop, it feels like all very separate things that we need to plan for and think about. But really, if we can bring it back to showing the similarities in the scheduling and similarities in the components, then that actually makes it easier for teachers to schedule out blocks of their day because it's more repetitious for them. And so choose carefully how we bring it back as to not being extra things, but show the commonalities between all of them. And of course, one of the biggest ones is that kids get to have independent time to read and to read. And so that is where we're going to dive into next when we talk about small group conferring and touching base. This is an important piece because, like we said before, this mini lesson, the mini lesson component really is a strategy we're giving to everybody to be able to use. But we know not everybody is at that spot and everybody is going to be mastering that piece at that time. We know it's kind of an introduction to the group to learn and practice the strategy, but we know we really need to be filling in the gaps. And so all of our teaching, really our core instruction for those students is going to be during that small group time that we have available during independent reading and writing. And so Diane is going to kind of kick us off and start talking. We are focusing on this area around Essential 3, so we are going to be going through Essential 3 and referring to that for all of these different components so you can see how this is closely tied in with what they're doing with the essential practices. I think it's stuck in my ear.
Okay, so as Katie said earlier, we're going to spend the rest of our session time together today really focusing on small group and individual instruction, and that is what Essential 3 focuses on. So, as is true with all of the essential practices, a measurable impact can be made on literacy development by using these practices in every classroom every day. And that's been proven to be, small group and individual instruction has been proven to be particularly beneficial for students who are struggling with literacy, students in poverty, and also English language learners. The one thing to keep in mind here, though, is that teachers don't need to meet with every small group every day, but they do need to be providing small group instruction every day. So some teachers are under the impression that because it says I have to do small groups every day, I have to meet with every single group every day. It's certainly okay to let the higher groups go and meet with them less frequently, do a touch base with them, which we'll talk about in a minute, but definitely be meeting with your below grade level students every day. So this is the wording for the heading or the top part of essential number 3. It says small group and individual instruction using a variety of grouping strategies, most often with flexible groups formed and instruction targeted to children's observed and assessed needs in specific aspects of literacy development. So that's a mouthful. But really, two super important things that are brought out in this statement. One is that one size does not fit all. We have to be addressing our instruction to students' individual needs, and that's the second piece, is that We're targeting our instruction based on children's observed and assessed needs. So we're going to take a lot of time today to dig deeper into those pieces. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's often a misunderstanding out there that small group instruction is Tier 2 or Tier 3 instruction, and it is not. Daily small group instruction is Tier 1, and it's something that every student should be getting. And again, your higher students don't have to get it every day, but they should be getting small group instruction. If students are in need of Tier 2 interventions, that might take place in your classroom as well. That's an intervention that's not something that every student would get. Tier 3 pullouts, same thing. But students who are getting Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions still need the same Tier 1 type of instruction that all your other students are getting. So if they're getting pulled out for intervention, it doesn't take the place of them participating in a small group in your classroom.
And if we take a closer look at the bullet points, the first one talks about spending most of their time actually reading and writing, or in kindergarten and first grade, they're kind of working to get there. And one of the best examples that I can give and why this is really important is because a lot of times we choose to pull strategy groups on phonics. That tends to be in the lower grades, even in the upper grades, some of the things that kids are working on. And so we tend to pull groups and we want to work on, for example, a word sort or making words or another activity like that. But one thing that we forget to do then is we forget to bring those words back to their text. So then that way they've practiced the skill, they've practiced the pattern, but now they need to read it within the context of the stories that they're reading, whether it be a book that you already have set aside for them or if it's something that you pick out specifically to match kind of what that skill is. But we always want to make sure that kids know how to apply it to their reading and writing. Otherwise, we get a lot of those kiddos who meet with you every single day and they are working on word building, but when they sit down with books, they are still looking at it like, oh, I don't have my word cards here, so I really don't know how to make this word or figure it out. And so that application piece is what this is kind of talking about. Bring it back to real reading and writing so kids know how to apply the skills that you're teaching them. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about the small group portion of it right now. Small groups really should be flexible groups, and so they can be made up of a lot of different things. Levels are very common, and they're used a lot for guided reading groups, and there's nothing wrong with you meeting with your kids in guided reading groups and to be reading with their levels. However, we have to start thinking about different things that we can do with kids as well. And I'm going to give you an example of my oldest son, because this is where this hits home for me a little bit more. My oldest son is in 4th grade, and he is dyslexic. He has no problem comprehending talking about text. He does have huge issues decoding and is not fluent. He's several grade levels below when it comes to reading at a level. So therefore, in several of his classes, he was put into leveled groups, and all the time he's working at this lower level, and the comprehension skills are not moving him along. However, he is able to comprehend at very high levels, and therefore school is boring for him. He doesn't like small group because he always feels like he is the dumb kid who doesn't get to have a chance to talk. And he had a fantastic teacher last year who, instead of always having him in that leveled group, moved him up to the next grade level for a skill group on comprehension, and he thrived. And you should have seen how that decoding moved up because he was excited to try to read the book and talk about the book. And all of a sudden he started scooting through levels. But when we were keeping him at that level, he wasn't moving along because he didn't have the motivation to keep going. And so we really need to think about kids and where are their talents, where are their strengths and weaknesses, and help to support them in all those ways so then that way they can have that confidence and keep moving forward. And so, of course, skill group is another way that we can meet with kids. Commonly, this is used for phonics, but you can easily pull a skill group on a comprehension skill or on a fluency practice or something else you're doing. It doesn't just have to be phonics for skill groups. Also, like I said, interest groups. It's okay if you have kids, let's say you have a lower reader who has a book on frogs and a higher reader that has a book on frogs. You can still have all the kids with a frog book come sit up, and they can each read their parts of the story, and they can share out and have a conversation and a discussion about the frogs and about their thinking and their learning from their book, although they're at different levels. And so we have to try to think a little bit differently about how we can make kids excited for books too, because the kids that we typically are pulling over and over and over again for small groups are the ones who do need that excitement and interest. That the pan and a can and that does not do it for them. They need to be able to have some context in their stories as well. And then also standards-based. If you're not sure with your data where to go next with students, and you're working on specific standards, then find kids in those certain standard groups and pull them together similar to a strategy group, and you can work through it through that lens as well. And so really most of our discussions that we've had through all of our training says none of these are wrong ways of doing things. So if you find you're heavy in levels or heavy in skills, it's not as though you're doing something wrong or not helping students. But if we can kind of keep that more flexible and get kids in and out of different groups, then we will see them progressing along even quicker. And so we have in your folder, it's not the lab one, but it's the one right after the lab one, there is a form. And we'll talk a little bit about the importance of why both of these are on here. But this form shows your weekly schedule with conferring and with strategy groups. This can be traded out for levels for a day. It can be traded out for your skill group or your interest group, however you want to do it. But one thing to keep in mind is that when Diane talks about conferring, it's really important to have kids in different areas. So you might have some kids that you pull for strategy groups because they all have a need, but there might be some kids that you are going to be conferring with. And I just want to give you one example before Diane jumps into that. There are a lot of times that we'll say that our lowest kids that we're most concerned about, we always need to have them in a group. But I want you to stop and think about that kindergartner. The kindergartner who cannot focus. Maybe your goal with that kindergartner is that they're going to learn 4 letters and sounds. Think in your mind, is it more productive use of your time to pull up 3 or 4 kids and go through 4 letters and sounds? Or if you made it a habit of meeting with that child every day a couple times during the block and practicing just those 4 letter sounds quickly, is that going to be a way that they can focus on that with you quickly and learn that skill and practice it regularly? Or is it a better use of your time to pull them in a small group? And so even when you're looking at your struggling kids, not even always just your high ones, really thinking about the type of support that they need is really important. There are a lot of kids who can do great with small group instruction, and as we know, there are some kids that are not, and sometimes we make them, come over here, you're going to be in small group because we have to get you in. I have to meet with you every single day. But we have to remember sometimes they just have different needs, and our goal is not to pull them in small group, our goal is to meet their needs, and so we need to think about that. So you've got that sheet in there, and then also there are links to these in the PowerPoint. I don't want to pass them out to you because the authors in the blog talk about how they use them, and I don't want to take words out of their mouth. But there are some other conference writing forms in there, so if you want to look a little bit more and see what there is out there, you can go into these and look as well. One of the things that we wanted to note here too is that a lot of teachers use the format of using some kind of tracking plan to where they kind of keep all their data and they just keep checklists of where their kids are at. And then that way they can quickly look and say, okay, I'm going to take these kids today, they're digraph kids. And I'm going to take these kids today because they're CBC kids. And then maybe you have another one that has interest and you say, okay, I'm going to take these few kids that have interest kids. And so by having all the information laid out, then that way if you are on the spot and you have an extra few minutes to pull a group or an extra few minutes to check in, your data's right in front of you, so then that way you can quickly make those adjustments as you need to. I'm clicking through all these. I don't care. And this is Nell Duke. I just want to share her opinion or her thinking when it comes to leveling. We talked a little bit about this, but this is what some of the researchers are talking about, and so I just wanted to share this slide with you. But levels, first of all, are very approximate. So even if you are using a guided reading group or levels, please keep in mind that although a child might have that instructional level as an L, we want to remember, though, that they have a lot of interest in their reading, and there's a lot of different vocabulary that's going to come into play. And so really, our students don't read just an L. They read between a continuum or a variety of levels. So keep that in mind that it's very approximate. So kind of be flexible in your thinking about that as well. And then also, really, students can be at the same level for so many different reasons. And so if we pull a whole group of kids at one level, this one might be a fluency kid, this one might be a decoding kid, this one might be a comprehension kid, and then really our small group is no longer a small group because we're individualizing for each student anyway. And so we might as well look at the skill and pull them by skill if we need to in that situation. And then also, this is one that we have to really think about too, that a lot of times we question when our students are getting to the age where they have to take M-STEP and other tests and that they can't handle the text very well, and so we're not doing well because they can't read the words on there. And so we want to make sure that we are making kids practice text that is at their level. And so it's okay for the kids to have to read higher text and to help them to figure out how to do it rather than always keeping them down to lower text. Help them figure out the vocabulary and how would you figure out the phonics and how would you use clues to be able to figure out the meaning. Another one is that there are research studies that talk about that question, do we always have to be matching a level with a reader? And you've seen things on Twitter going on about that as well. That do we really have to do that, or can we let them have some choice in the books and things that they're reading? You can always use strategy groups. And then also, we don't want kids to get stuck being in the same group all year long, because then we start to lose confidence and motivation, and then we don't really ever make the progress we need to. And so what we're going to do is we are going to watch a few examples. We're going to watch a reading and writing small group, and later you will watch a reading and writing conferring. In your packet, you have a lab sheet, another virtual lab, and this one is for small group instruction. And what I want you to do is I want you to just take a minute, and you're going to read through the components so you can kind of keep yourself familiar with them. And as you watch all 4 videos, you're going to keep pulling the same form back out. So we're not going to have new forms for each video. You're just going to kind of have ongoing notes of things that you noticed. They're all going to be very different. They're different grade levels. But we did pick the Jennifer Saravello videos, and the reason we did is because there are a lot of schools in the area that are using the Reading and Writing Strategies book right now, that are studying the small group instruction book right now, and so we felt as though seeing videos of some of those things in action might be helpful in an application piece. But there are certainly a lot of other small group videos on YouTube that you could look at as well. And so this first one is 5th grade, and you are going to see a small group instruction.
When several students have a common area of need, gather them for a strategy lesson. The 7 to 10 minutes you spend teaching a strategy lesson are efficient and effective. The students still receive individual feedback as they would in a one-on-one conference, but meeting with them all together takes much less time. Choose a strategy lesson when you want to provide guided practice for students to transfer strategies to their independent reading, teach efficiently when students have a common goal, or hold students accountable to ongoing work around their goal. As you start a strategy lesson, be sure to explain why you've brought this particular group of students together. If possible, compliment the students on a habit or behavior you've noticed them using when they read. Be clear and explicit in outlining the strategy you will be working on in the lesson. You may choose to quickly demonstrate or lead a shared practice of the strategy before they practice it with your support. Plan to spend most of the lesson time circulating among the students, prompting, coaching, and supporting them as they practice. In the lesson you're about to see, I teach 3 students a strategy to help them use text features to understand unknown vocabulary in a nonfiction text. Even though all the students are working on the same strategy, they work with their own text, and I must be aware of each student's level of proficiency with the strategy. Notice how I guide the students to synthesize information from multiple parts of a page, use text-based evidence to support their thinking, use what they learned to deeply explain the word or concept. At the end of the lesson, I remind the students to apply what they've learned to the books and other texts they are reading independently. I make my expectations as explicit as possible so that students return to their independent reading focused on a specific goal for practicing this new strategy set. you together today because the goal that you all have for yourselves as readers is to try to really understand the vocabulary words that you're coming upon in your books. And I wanted to teach you a new strategy today to help you to do that. Sometimes in a book, the author will help us out by giving us text features, like a map, captions, photographs, and sometimes these text features can help us to understand a word when it's not explained right there in the text. Like I was reading this book, the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and it says here, the ship had grounded on Bligh Reef, not far from Bligh Island. I know what a reef is, I know what an island is, in Alaska's Prince William Sound. I know the word sound means like noises, but I didn't know what it meant here. So I looked to the map, and I see here that there's a picture of this little tiny, almost reminds me of like a gulf, like a small amount of water in here. So here I'm thinking sound is like a small enclosed part of water. And that makes sense with what's happening in the text. So that's what you're going to try today. When you come upon a word that's unfamiliar to you, I want you to use the text features, the pictures, the captions, the maps, the graphs, the timelines, whatever you see, to try to help you figure out what that word is. All right, let's open up your books. And I'll come around and help each one of you as you read. All right, anything there that's new for you? Any new terms?
Yeah, the word scurry.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
So what's the text feature you can use to help you there?
Well, I see like a lot of ants moving up a leaf.
Moving, okay.
They're actually kind of moving really quickly. So.
And that's really cool that you use this word to try to help you kind of imagine or visualize how they're moving. They're moving quickly up the leaf. Good, keep reading. Have you come upon any words yet? Nothing yet? Let me just take a look. Can you explain what this word means?
Satellite.
Mm-hmm.
It's a piece. Well, it's something in the solar system, and actually don't know that much about.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think sometimes that'll happen. You'll come to a word and you'll say, I kind of know a little bit about it, but I want you to know a lot about it to be able to explain it. So can you read a little bit here and then look and see if these text features help you, and I'll come right back to you. Okay. Have you found any words?
Yeah. I found epicenter.
Okay. And what do you think that word means?
I think it means like where it starts, like where the earthquake starts.
And is there anything on the page that might help you? Any text features?
Well, it does say it in bold, so I think that there might be like a glossary that I can look back to.
Let's check.
Glossary. Right here.
Okay.
Epicenter. A point on the Earth's surface above the start of an earthquake.
Okay, so go back to the text and now say, what do you think that word means?
I think that it means like where it started, like where it starts.
Okay, I'm going to give you the same advice. I want you to see if you can do more than just give a definition, because what's in the glossary is a definition. See if you can explain it. And I'm going to clue you in to look over here at this map. And then look here at this photograph. See if that helps you at all. Did we find another one? What word did you find?
I found one, but I just finished asking it, so.
Okay, let's turn back.
It's this word right here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the picture, I think since it's pointing to these two like antennas, I think this word is what this is. Well, I think this word describes the ant's antennas are what the specific word for it.
Yeah, what this diagram does is it shows you what an antenna is. But if I asked you to explain what it is, what would you say?
Well, I would say that the antenna based on the antenna and what I know about ants, that the antennas.
Well, before you say that, let's look and see what does the text show you. You could say antenna are.
There are things that might help them see, or might help them know what things are.
Okay, so that tells you that in the text. When I'm asking you to describe it, what I mean is just kind of use the picture to say more than what the text says. Like, there's two things that stick out of the ant's head. They're long and they're pointy. They have little hairs on them. Right? So it doesn't say that, but I can see that. And now that I see that, I can describe it. Let's try that with another one of these terms on this page. Using that diagram, see if you can explain what that word means. All right, can we go back to that word I left you with before?
A satellite is a robot in space that helps take pictures.
Thank you. So you can kind of see a couple things in this example. First of all, she talked at the beginning to introduce and to kind of explain what she was about to do, and that took a couple minutes. And so really, so far, if you look, it goes to 10 minutes, and that's as long as it is. And so sometimes we believe that we have to spend 15 to 20 minutes every day in our small group, and we really don't. We can take smaller amounts of time with our small groups. Another thing to notice is if you look at the little boy's book compared to the girl's book, he is using an easier reader with pictures in there. And so she still uses the same language with him at that level because he's a 5th grader. He needs to know what that language is. However, she refers back to pictures for him to help to gain that because he doesn't have maps and other things there that are able to help him out as they are with the other 5th grade students in the group. And so just keeping your eye on a couple of those things. What I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and take a minute, and I want you to just say something out at your group, something that you noticed about the video that you just watched. Okay, the next video that we are going to watch is an example of small group instruction, but this time it is for writing. So then that way you can kind of compare and contrast the differences between a small group for reading and writing. You can use the same note-taking sheet for this as well.
So I know that we have been working on elaborating or writing more in our stories. And we know that some ways we can elaborate is by writing down our thoughts, writing down what we're feeling, and writing down what we're saying or other people are saying. And I noticed when I was looking at your writing that you guys all have some of those things in your writing. But I was thinking that I could show you about a really special spot where you can put in thinking and talking and feeling into your writing. And that's at the end of the story. So instead of writing the end at the end of our writing book, we can end with someone saying something, someone thinking something, or someone feeling something. And you guys have that choice as a writer of how you want to end your story to make it really powerful. So writers do that all the time. I was looking through my books, and I found some of our books from the classroom where the author ended with thinking or talking or feeling too. I'm going to show you some of them now. In this book, Sammy's Slippery Day, it's a book about our friend Sammy. He gets in a lot of trouble and makes a huge mess. Well, at the end of the story, after Dad finishes cleaning Sammy up and has an action there, the author finishes the story by saying, "I think you've caused enough trouble for today, Sammy." And the mom ends with talking in this book. Then I was reading this book when Tiny was tiny. And in this book, the author ends with a thought. It's about a boy and his bug, Tiny, who's not tiny at all. And he says, "When Tiny was tiny, he was my best friend. He still is." Did you see how the author in this book ended with what people were saying? And the author in this book ended with what someone was thinking. Now, looking at your writing, you ended your stories with action. That's one way to end it, but another way is to add thinking and feeling and talking. So I'm going to pass out your stories, and I want you to think about how you can add to the ending of your story. So let's take a look. Why don't you read your story so you can figure out and get to the end and remember it. And while you're doing that, I'm going to take your goal sheet and I'm going to put this on top. At the end there, it says that we're working on elaborating, and I'm just going to add this right to the bottom because we know that we can elaborate at the ending by adding and talking, feeling, and thinking. Okay? So here you go. Think about that. Read your story. Think about what you can add. Now you're on the last page. You're at the end. Let's see how we can add and make a strong, powerful ending. Could you add what you're talking, feeling, or thinking? Pick one of those and see what you want to add.
I was thinking, oh boy.
You're thinking, oh boy, say more.
I was thinking, at least I didn't die.
Okay, so you can add that. Go ahead and add it in there. So you got to the end of your story right here.
Oh, yeah.
You came out and you had to put water on it after you got hurt and you felt better. We're at the end of the story. You're adding, you're talking, you're feeling, and you're thinking. You get to choose what you want to add to your end of your story. Did you decide, Evan? What are you going to add to your story?
How I was feeling at the end.
You are? How were you feeling?
Sad.
So you're going to say, I was feeling sad because?
Because I was out.
Okay, so you fell in the pool, and then your mom saved you. Oh my goodness, can you add talking, feeling, or thinking there to make a powerful ending of your story? Go ahead, add it. What do you think you want to do, Karen? Which one? Your mom just saved you from the pool.
Thinking.
What were you thinking when your mom saved you?
Good. I was thinking,
Maybe you could say what you were talking about. What'd you say to her after she picked you up and saved you from the pool?
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead and add that. So you can add talking, feeling, or thinking. You get to choose. So I just want to stop you and tell you that when we're writing and ending, we know that we can end with the small actions. But today we talked about 3 other ways that we can end. We can end with what we're thinking, what we're talking or saying, and how we are. So let's say that together. Thinking, talking, feeling, in order to create a powerful ending of our stories. Okay, good job.
And of course, there are many other examples to see, but these are 2 examples of what a small group could look like, and they're both more brief small groups than what we might think we need to be pulling sometimes. But of course, small group instruction isn't the only way to be meeting our students' needs, and so Diane is going to talk a little bit about conferring.
Okay, so conferring means individual one-on-one instruction. And in the beginning of this, we also talked about something called touching base. And the next page in your packet after your virtual lab sheet, there's an article written by Debbie Miller called The Difference Between Conferring and Touching Base. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of points from that article. You can read it later when you have time. But touching base is basically a quick check-in. So it's just stopping by a student and maybe encouraging them to keep persisting. Maybe it's helping them get back on task if they're off task. Maybe it's asking them where they are in just working on their goal, reminding them to keep working toward a goal that they have. But it's really just sort of a surface level checking in with students. Conferring is a much deeper one-on-one intentional conversation that you have with the student, where you spend time listening to them read, going over their writing with them, sharing an instructional point with them, and leaving them with a goal. So it goes much deeper than just touching base. Both are important. You can touch base with a lot of kids in a short period of time. And maybe you only confer with 2 or 3 kids in the course of a day. But that conferring time is really important. Conferring also tends to be something that when the rubber hits the road and we're feeling pressured for time, it's an easy thing to let go. But it's really one of the last things you want to let go of because it is so impactful, that one-on-one instruction. And Debbie Miller in her article also refers to Richard Allington's research that shows the high level of impact that one-on-one conferring time has in moving students forward in their learning. So when you are conferring with students, you want to make sure that the largest amount of your time is spent actually interacting with that student and not taking notes. At the same time, you do want to make some notes so that you can go back later and keep your instruction with that student focused, because you're not going to confer with every student every day. So you might talk to a student on Monday, make a quick note, and then not talk to them again on a one-on-one basis until the following Monday. So taking notes is important, but you don't want it to take up all your time when you're meeting with that student. The other thing is you want to leave your students with a goal every time you confer with them. It might be continuing to work on a goal that they already have, but you're going to give them some instructional point to move them forward on that goal, or it might be a new goal that you and the student set together. So in addition to having ways to keep track for yourself, which we'll talk about in a minute, of your conferences, you also want to have ways for your students to keep track of the goals that you set for them. So I'm going to show you on the screen a few different examples. So in the bottom left corner, this is a teacher that just leaves a Post-it note with the student with the goal that they want them to work on between now and the next time they confer. This example is a student-decorated pocket that can go into a journal that they can tuck their goal into. This is a little form that the student can fill out for a reading conference, and it has the book title, their goal for next time, and then here they can keep track of things they want to talk to their teacher about, as they're reading between the 2 conferences. This form is something you can use just to help you keep track of the students as you confer with them, just a place to jot notes. And this one is more specific to the student, where you can put down the book title, you can make note of strategies that you're using with that student, a compliment that you can pay them, teaching point, and then also what you want to work on next with that student. So back on the slide that Katie shared about small groups, there was those 2 links to reading conference forms and writing conference forms. So if you need to look at different types of forms and how to kind of keep yourself organized and taking notes from conferring, that's a good place to look. The other thing is that once you have taken the notes, the point is not to take the notes. The point is to use the notes to help inform your instruction. So once you have all those notes, if you have them in a format like this one maybe, where you've got things on the same page, or some teachers like to use sticky notes, and then you can sit down at a table and you can look for what are things that kids are struggling with or areas that I want to move them to next that are similar, and you can start to form some flexible groups with your students based on your conferring notes. So another tool that can be really helpful for you in terms of not only knowing what to talk to your students about when you're conferring with them, but also that piece that I just mentioned of taking your notes and looking to see, can I form some small groups to provide some strategy or skill instruction for my students, is learning continuums, where you can, and I forgot to pull that one up, so if you maybe could click on the bottom one. This will help you sort of see where your students are. That's okay. So this is one example of a learning continuum, and you can see that it's by level, and then there's questions that you can ask of the students that would be appropriate questions for them to be able to answer at their current level. But you can also look ahead, and you can say, okay, here's where my students are right now. Where am I taking them from here? What instructional moves can I make to move them from where they are to the next level? So there's two different continuums in there that can be helpful to you. Also, knowing your standards and seeing, where are my students within the standards is another thing that can be helpful to you. So we're going to look at two more videos, one reading and one writing. And these videos, yes, you have a question?
We're not seeing this PowerPoint in the Google Classroom.
Are you in the Balanced Literacy Classroom?
Yes.
We put it in there.
There is one in there, but it's not.
You have to click on
the slide that says Balanced Literacy.
So you go.
You have to actually
Click on the words balanced literacy. That slide right there.
Oh, we just put the opening one in there. I thought we changed it. I apologize. We'll change it. We'll post the full one. But if you do just have the opening one, if you click on the one that says Balanced Literacy, it will take you into this. Thank you for calling our attention to that. So on your, it's on the small group lab sheet, right? The conferring, or is it in the workshop one? Probably the workshop one.
They can continue to take notes on the lab sheet if they want.
Yeah. So on your virtual lab reading sheet, there should be a place on the back where you can take notes about conferring. So the first video that we're going to watch is a reading conference. And then the second one we're going to watch is a writing conference. So you can take a look at how these teachers are doing their one-on-one conferring with students.
Hey, Julian. So I hear you just finished this book. Yeah, you couldn't wait to tell me you finished. Tell me, what did you think of it?
It was good.
Okay. What were some of the things you were thinking about toward the end of the book?
Towards the end,
Yeah.
I said, I made a prediction. I said, there's a boys team and a girls team, and they want to see who can talk for the least amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I predicted that it would be a tie.
Okay.
And my prediction came true. And I made another prediction how long this is going to go on for.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's...
Let me stop you. If you were to think about the very end of the story and the very last thoughts you were having as you finished up this book, what were you thinking about?
Like, in the beginning of the book, the boys and girls weren't real friends, they weren't communicating well. And at the end, Lindsay, she's like the captain of the girls' team.
Mm-hmm.
She was keeping track of everything, and Dave thought she just made it a tie, and I said, but why would Lindsay do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like they've been getting along well.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like what you're paying attention to as a reader is that across the book, things change, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning of the story, the characters might be one way or act one way, and by the end of the story, they might change a lot.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing to pay attention to, because lots of times the change of the story gives us some clues as to what the story's really about. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what's the lesson or the message that I'm supposed to take away from this book as a reader? How has the character changed? What has the character realized? And therefore, what should I realize as the reader? Can we think about that a little bit together? Okay, what are you thinking?
That, like, boys and girls can get along if they, like, try.
I like how you said that in a way that it's not just about this book, but you might find that in a lot of books.
And
Like,
general.
it's general, yeah, like boys and girls can get along. Are there any other that come to mind? Sometimes there's not just one, there's more than one.
Like, not all people are perfect.
What makes you say that?
Because in the beginning of the book, Dave was like but boys can talk less than girls, and they were having like a fight about it. And at the end of the book, I thought that like, well, nobody should really conflict because nobody can talk as much.
So I think what you're doing that's really important is when you're thinking about a lesson or message, it's not just something that happened in one small part of the book, it's something that happened across the book. Maybe at the beginning of the book, and the end of the book, or at multiple places in the book. So I don't know about you, Julianne, but every time I finish a book, I always think, I close the book and I think, what did this book teach me? Right? What's the lesson I'm going to take away from this book? I might not remember every single detail in the book, but I can remember and carry with me the big ideas that I have. And that's something you can do any time you read a story. Okay? Okay.
Okay, so the next example that we're going to watch
what did you think of it?
It was good.
Is a writing conference. And we may cut that one a little short just because we're starting to get a little crimped on time, but we want to at least give you a glimpse into a writing conference.
And this girl, I love her hair. It makes me smile every time.
So Ella, I'm going to be meeting with kids in the class, and we're going to be setting goals for ourselves as writers. Do you know what a goal is?
Yeah.
What are goals?
Something you want to get better at.
Exactly, something you want to get better at. And I'm going to have conversations with kids about the thing that they think they're doing really well as writers and the thing they want to get better at as writers. Let me tell you some of the goals that writers tend to have for themselves, right? Sometimes writers want to help themselves be focused. Those are writers who write about different things on every page of their book, and they're scattered and all over the place, and they write about too many things. They might want to work on focus. Other writers might pick to work on organizing their writing. Like, remember we talked today about how a story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end? Yeah. If people were writing out of order, they might say, ooh, I need help to organize my writing. Other writers might pick to work on adding details to their writing. They want to add more to the pictures or more to the words. Some writers might work on spelling, so people can read their writing. Some people might work on punctuation, like adding periods or commas to their writing. So those are some of the ideas of goals that we could work on as writers. Let's go ahead and read your story to me. And I want you to think, what am I good at as a writer? Like, what am I doing so well that I can maybe even help my friends in my class? And then what are something that I want to work on to get better at, a goal for myself? Okay, go ahead and read your writing to me.
One time I went to Disney World. I went on Splash Mountain. It was wet and it had lots of little drops inside and one big drop outside. One time at Disney World, I went on Thunder Mountain. It was long and scary.
So what do you think you do well as a writer?
Spelling.
I agree with you. You really write the words clearly so other people can read them. What else do you do well as a writer? Yeah, you can look here if you want. What else do you think you do well?
Punctuation.
Show me where you think you have punctuation really clear for your readers. Yeah, exactly. You put a period at the end of every sentence. So let's think together. What do we think you want to work on as a writer? It's going to make your stories even better.
Focus.
Do you think your whole story is about one thing?
No.
No. What's your story about?
Splash Mountain and Thunder Mountain and the mine train.
Are you going to write a whole other thing too?
Yes.
You got a plan for another one. So I can help you with that, okay? I can help you make sure your writing is focused. one of the things I like to do when I look back at my booklet is I say, is this all one story or is this different stories? And you just said it's different stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I could take my book apart like this. And I can add new pages to my book to make sure that all of the pages are about one thing. So let's start with this Splash Mountain story idea. You think this is going to be the beginning of your Splash Mountain story, the middle of the Splash Mountain story, or the end?
Beginning.
Okay, so one time I went to Disney World. I went on Splash Mountain. It was wet and it had lots of little drops inside and one big drop outside. If you're going to still focus on Splash Mountain, what would be the next part of your story? Can you remember it? So on this page, I noticed you sort of told me about the ride. What you can do, even if you look at your picture, what happened first at the Splash Mountain ride? First we...
got on the ride.
Yeah, first we got on the, what is it called?
Splash Mountain.
First we got on a Splash Mountain
Log.
Oh, it's a log. It's a big log. First we got on the Splash Mountain log. Okay, and then?
Then.
And we're going to pause it right here. She continues to process with her through what were the next 3 steps that she did, so then that way she could go off to independent writing, and she was working on it on her own.
Katie, can I ask a quick question on that one?
Yeah.
So since you watched it, so because she is, and I'm just making an assumption here, because she is very slow to process, I'm thinking if I send her back, if she's my student and I send her back and say, okay, now go write what you told me, she's not going to be able to do that. Like, I'm almost thinking at this point, I'm going to send her back and do one piece at a time.
And that she'll send her back to start working on a section of it. And my assumption would also be that she would check in on her as well, because she's obviously she's working with her because she's struggling at.
Well, and that's what I'm thinking is that if she does one small piece, would you send her back just to do the one small piece and then do a check-in again?
I would send her back I would give her the big picture so she at least knows where she's going, and then send her back with one thing that she can kind of focus in on and then check in on that one thing.
Okay.
And she would be somebody to where I would do a touch base. So after I conferred with her and sent her off, she would touch base. And then the next day I would choose, am I going to touch base with her or do I need to confer with her again? And so that's how I would support her.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. It's a good question. Thank you. And you'll notice the time on that video is 7 minutes and 45 seconds. And this is a student who takes longer to process. She's not rushing her. She's giving her that time to think. So maybe she'll meet with one less student that day because she's devoting a little more time to this student. But you can also see the impact that that's likely going to have on this student's ability to move forward, right?
Oh, sorry. I have to click on it for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like you to take a minute and just go back over your notes on your lab sheet from both the reading conference and the writing conference, and then jot a few notes in answer to this question. When might you use small groups to instruct, touching base, and conferring with your students? How would you delineate between when you would use each of those types of instruction? So the next bullet in the essentials, I'm going to ask you to finish your conversation, please. The next bullet in the essentials says the teacher coaches children as they engage in reading and writing, with reading prompts focusing primarily on monitoring for meaning, letters and groups of letters and words, and rereading. And the emphasis of this bullet is really about coaching and prompting the student to help move their learning forward. So there are lots of different resources on different kinds of prompts that you can use with students. This is one example from the What Works Clearinghouse. And this has the prompts broken out into prompts for less advanced readers and more advanced readers. You also have in your packets, the front side looks like this. This is from Mel Duke. So this is some information on prompting students, and on the back there is a student-friendly version of this that you can use as developmentally appropriate for your students. One thing that we do want you to really think about when you leave today and are thinking about what you're going to take back to your buildings with you is that prompting language ideally should be the same across classrooms and across grade levels. So that when students are, and even with your interventionists, so when students are working with someone or conferring with someone, they're not constantly being given different prompts that can confuse them. So if you're all using the same language, if everyone in your building is using something like this, then students are getting a consistent level of support no matter who they're with. The other thing I want to point out about this one is the very bottom one says check the picture. The reason why that's at the very bottom is that what happens as students progress in their reading? Pictures go away, right? So we don't want that to be a main thing that students rely on. Of course, in the early grades, using the pictures can be helpful for them. But we kind of want that to be not the first go-to, but the last. Okay?
The next bullet point is really focusing on fluency, and some examples of fluency in the bullet are repeated reading, echo reading, paired, and partner reading. And we have included in the PowerPoint some videos, so if you want more clarification as to what these look like, you can access those at a different time. But preview reading is really kind of doing the book walk, looking at the pictures, kind of getting an idea of what the book is before you're reading. Choral reading is when everybody is reading at the same time. Partner reading is when you have your partners together. Sometimes you'll see partners doing a choral reading together or a repeated reading together. The repeated reading is when either a teacher or a partner reads first and then the student will repeat what that person has just read. Obviously, rereading, looking at our books and rereading them over and over again. And then the last one is dyad reading. And this is something that prior to my training, I wasn't really familiar with what dyad training was. And so I have all of this in the PowerPoint so you can refer back to it. But I'm going to give you in a nutshell what dyad reading is. Dyad reading basically is when you have two partners that you are putting together. One is a more skilled reader and one is your reader that might be struggling a little bit more. You want to make sure that the book that you pick, that your skilled reader is very confident and fluent in reading. And basically what they're doing is they're kind of reading next to each other or with each other. And so the skilled reader is kind of the lead reader. They're the ones that are going to be reading through the text, kind of setting the pace, setting the tone for the reading. And the reader that might be struggling is going to read along and try to keep up with the pace and try to read along with that reader that's with them. One thing that's important to keep in mind is we want to make sure that we have those partners together for about 4 days, for about a week or so, but we don't want to keep them together all the time. We want to switch up those partners and those readers for dyad reading. Another thing, this is in your folder. This is an example of fluency-oriented reading instruction. And one of the reasons we wanted to bring this to your attention is because one of the difficult things that we have with fluency is trying to get all of our students to be reading fluently with grade level text. And so this isn't working at fluency at their levels. This is everybody reading at the grade level. And so this is a way that you can set up your small group and have a plan for how you can help to support them in both their fluency and their comprehension. And so you'll notice as you look through the days, the small group will be doing different types of reading together. Just like I showed you, the teacher is going to read aloud first with the student and have conversation. Then it will go to echo reading, choral reading. Then they'll go down to partner reading, and then they should be able to independently read the text. So it's kind of that gradual release method for their fluency. But then also throughout that piece, we're trying to help with that comprehension as well. So then that way we're building the comprehension skills. Just please keep in mind that this isn't something that is working at their struggling level. So just so you know that you could still do like Monday through Friday, having those days where you're reading through text at their level. But the questioning and the comprehension piece is supposed to be helping them to be thinking at that grade level. And so that's the purpose with the 4E. But there's an example in there, and we have that linked as well for you. And then also, I'm bringing this up because of the Fluency Continuum, but I wanted to hit on the Continuum piece just a little bit more. I think one of the hardest pieces about doing small group and conferring is that we really have to feel out where the kids are at. And in order to do that best, we have to know continuums. We have to know what comes next along the way so we know where to keep guiding kids. And sometimes that's difficult because sometimes we have programs that have gaps and we don't really know how to fill in that gap and where to go next. And so we wanted to give you some examples of different continuums. The continuums that are in your folder are not continuums that we are promoting or saying this is what you have to use. They're just examples of what some different districts are using. And so then that way you have something at your fingertips if you don't already have them with your programs. The first one is the Fluency Continuum. And basically this is talking about if students are having trouble reading fluently, sometimes we need to go back to the deep root as to why. Sometimes students aren't even able to hear or produce sounds very fluently, especially a lot of students who are dyslexic or students who have speech. That phoneme fluency is something that they still have to build up. And so helping them to be able to be more fluent with just naming out sounds, seeing pictures, naming out words, some of those different things to help them to start processing a little bit quicker will help them to increase their fluency. That will then move up to the letter sound fluency. Now you can start pulling in letter sounds. When they're able to do that, then they can decode words fluently. When they're able to do word fluency, they can go into sentences, then passages, then they can read a book or a chapter. But sometimes we just jump right to the passage and say we need to be really fluent in the passage, and sometimes we need to back them up a little bit and help them to become more fluent in a specific skill before they can apply that to their reading. Another thing that is in there, let's see, is the phonological awareness. This one is a 95% group, which some schools in our area use. But really, if you look up phonological awareness continuum, you'll find a lot of these things in the same order. But basically, this just kind of gives you a guide. If your students are falling into, for example, syllable, let's say they're in skill 3 according to this, and they're segmenting and blending compound words, they're able to do that. Then maybe you decide to do some manipulation strategies with syllables with them. Once they're good at that, then you can go on to skill 4 and you can do some onset rhyme. So this just kind of gives you an idea that if that student is way below your grade level and it is not in anything that is in any of your programming, or it's not something that you're doing with your whole class, continuums just let you know where to go next. So this you can refer to, but there's a lot more you could search if this one doesn't quite work for you. The next one that is in there then is the Phonics Continuum. And so this again is another stair step of where you want your kids to learn the skills and what skill would come next in phonics. So you can use this as a guide, and then the fluency one is in there as well. So those are just a few continuums that you can refer to. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, because I had someone ask me about this, is rapid automatic naming. For some kids that really struggle with processing, fluency is really hard for them because it's hard enough for them to be able to recall things very quickly. And so in here, will you click on that a minute for me? In here are a bunch of Randex, and basically what they are either picture cards or phonics skills. And what you do with the kids is you have them quickly go through the letters. I mean, it's like flashcard. You want them to know these, so then that way there's no hesitation or stopping. And so they're all in here. The picture cards are really important to use with kids who are really slow processors. Start with that first because that'll make them be confident that they can name those pictures really quickly. And it will become really apparent who's struggling, because there are a lot of kids, even in 4th and 5th grade, that when you rapidly show them pictures, can't name them quickly because they just don't have that quick processing, and that might show why they're having some issues with their fluency. And so you have access to all of these decks. So then that way, if you have some kids working on certain skills, you can pull out the decks and just practice with those with those students as well. Oh, sorry. I don't remember.
Okay, so the next bullet in the essentials says that the teacher includes explicit instruction as needed in word recognition strategies, including multisyllabic word decoding, text structure, comprehension strategies, and writing strategies. So basically, in a nutshell, what this is saying is that all of the instruction that you provide in small groups is on an as-needed basis. So how do we know what students need? So this is a graphic that Mel Duke put together that we like a lot, because it shows that you need to know your standards. What is it that students need to know? You need to assess your students to know what do they know in relation to those standards, and then develop your small group instruction and individualized instruction from that. So this is also from Nell Duke. She uses an acronym called SSI. So for the as-needed part, a teacher needs to be able to articulate the first S, which is the standards that he or she is addressing. The second S, what does she or he know about the students in the small group in relation to those standards? And then the I is the instruction planned as a result. So this is an example from Nell of what this might look like. I'm going to go through it really quickly because we're almost out of time. So there's a group of students doing things like reading house for home and stair for step. So they're focusing on beginning sounds, right? And they're kind of making a guess at what the rest of the word is. And the words that they're choosing fit within the context, but they're not the correct word. So the teacher pulls them together for a small group, and she does some explicit explaining about the importance of needing to pay attention to every sound, every letter in a word. So she might start with what they're doing well, and she might say, I see that you're doing a great job of paying attention to what makes sense. So the words that they're reading make sense, even though they're not the right word. And then she might identify what it is they can work on. So something that you can work on is paying attention to every sound in a word. And then how it will help them and why they're doing it. So that will help us to be better readers. Then the teacher engages students in word ladders. So she starts by having them build a word such as sat. And then she has them change out and move around letters and sounds in those words. And she really focuses on using some of the same letters in different places in the word to help the students see that they need to pay attention to all the letters in the word and not just the first ones. Once she has taken them through a couple of the word ladders and kind of gotten a feel for where the kids are, she's doing some assessing while they're doing that work. Then she has them choose among books related to a topic that the class is studying. So not every student has the same book. And as Katie had said earlier, this is where that instruction, that skill instruction, is brought back into reading, because ultimately that's why we're teaching them. So as they read, they're prompted and reminded to attend to all the letters in the words. The teacher coaches students, much like you saw Jennifer Saravallo do in her small group. And then, again, to bring back the importance of reading is for comprehension, not just to practice the skill I'm teaching you. The children discuss what they learned about their topic from the book. And then they each share an example of a word that they read where they looked carefully at all the letters. So you can see in this lesson that the teacher is keeping focused on both reading to comprehend, but also using a strategy to help these students overcome a difficulty that they're having in their reading.
Thank you. Many of you are using the reading and writing strategy books to be able to figure out what to do for your small groups. And so we did want to share a couple tools for you. In your packet, there is a connections page, and this directly correlates the essential practices to the reading strategies book. So if you don't have it and you want it, you can tell your district that there is direct correlation and you really should get the book. So this isn't really for sales, it's more for you, but just so you know it's here. And then, unfortunately, because the writing strategies book is so new, we don't have a ton for that. But the other thing that we have with the reading strategies book, and this is from Lowell. So Lowell, I don't know which some of you did this, but we have our fingers on it, so thanks. And what this is it's a guide to where you can look up a specific skill for a student, and it tells you what page within the strategies book that you can find a lesson. So it's kind of handy to have at your fingertips. And I just want to hit on just a couple other things briefly because we are going to dive into the word recognition piece. Another one of our sessions is fully on word study. So we are going to be doing a full section on word study and vocabulary, so we're not really going to dive into that too much. But one of the things we want to remember is that when we're teaching, we want it to be very explicit. We want to teach why the vowel does what it does, why the consonant does what it does. We want to be able to help them find parts of words. So we want to make sure it's explicit and it follows a continuum. Another thing is to keep in mind is when teaching sight words that we can teach sight words by phonics skills because students really actually do connect with a word and recognize a part of a phonics skill, and that's how they start to memorize it. They don't actually really just memorize it by looking at it. And so in this link, you'll be able to go in, and it has the Dolch words by skill, so then that way you can use those. And then also...
You can also, if you were not in the article, the What's Hot or Not article about teaching sight words, those articles are out on the table, and you could pick that up also.
And then the last one, you will be getting a ton of resources when it comes to things like sorting and word building and things like that when you come for the word building session. So we'll have more of those resources for you at that time. And then another strategy is reading comprehension. And so what we did is we just want to give you an idea where other tools are to be able to access information. If you haven't used the What Works Clearinghouse, there are a lot of great activities that are highly research-based activities. They're things that are referred to a lot by Nell Duke and by the other researchers that do all of our trainings. And we gave you one of the recommendations for comprehension, so then that way you could kind of look through it and see what strategies are in there. So then that way you're able to go to it. It is linked through so you can go in and kind of explore what Works Clearinghouse is. And also there's a great video by Nell Duke that you may want to watch or bring back to staff to be able to watch on comprehension as well. This is just the What Works Clearinghouse guide. And then the writing strategies. One of the things to keep in mind is that, let me bring that up in just a second. One of the things to keep in mind is that we want to have consistency. And so we gave you some tools, and one of the things that we want to remember is that if we're using, for example, the editing checklist that we gave you, if you're using a certain editing checklist in kindergarten, you want to keep the consistency of the same language going through your upper grade. And so we gave you a packet that has that. So then if you are looking for an editing checklist that you can use during your small group or your conferring, maybe that's something you can pass out to other teachers in your building for that consistency piece. And then also, to be effective writers, there's another great What Works Clearinghouse to be able to use. And we pulled out a couple of the samples for you in here. The first one is on writing strategies. And there's another one on techniques for the purposes of writing. And then the last one is on the structure of sentences. So these are some prompts or some things that you can use to help guide a small group or conferring for some pieces other than the editing process. And this is all from What Works Clearinghouse and has more resources in there for you to jump to as well. I do want to note one thing on here. One of the things that we put as consistency is the key, and we were talking about this, is that, for example, some people use race and some people use races when they go to do restating and answering, citing, and explaining. And we just want to show that although there are things out there that seem like very little differences, for kids they make big differences. And so even by putting posters up in your room for how you want them to do things, trying to keep staff at the same pace and using the same guides is really important to help students to be able to know and utilize the tool. Otherwise, if we give them several different tools, they tend to just make up what they want or pick what they want from each one and then make up their own. So that consistency piece is really important.
Okay, the last bullet that we're going to talk about today is the teacher is deliberate in providing quality instruction to children in all groups, with meaning making the ultimate goal of each group's work. And again, I want to emphasize that doesn't mean you have to meet with every group every day. But if you're doing similar to that one example we just looked at from Nell Duke, you're doing a phonics strategy, you still want to tie that back into the children actually reading and making meaning with the text that they're reading. So one of the important things about working with kids in small groups and conferring with them individually, we talked about this earlier, is making sure that you leave students with a goal, that you remind them of the skill that they're working on and set a goal for them in applying that skill. So this slide is kind of showing you some different ways that students can keep track of their goals. Students can work with you to set their goals. In your packet, you do have a copy of the SMART goal map, and I think probably most of us know what that acronym SMART stands for, because at some point in time or another we've probably all been asked to write SMART goals. But the S stands for make it specific, the M is make it measurable, the A is make it attainable, R is make it relevant, and T is make it timely. And then you also have a student self-assessment rubric in your packet. And this is kind of a nice one because it has some very student-friendly language, like I'm an expert, I'm a master, I'm an apprentice. It also uses the language that we use of meets expectations, exceeds expectations. But on the right-hand side, there's student-friendly language for them to be able to identify where they are on this rubric with any skill. So you can use this rubric for them across content areas, reading, writing, whatever skills you're working on. And then the last piece is related to that meaning making being the ultimate goal. So when we're helping students to make meaning, part of what we want to model for them and teach them to be able to do is that higher order thinking and higher order discussion. So there are some tools that you can use that will help you in terms of asking questions, but also getting kids to have some of that higher order discussion. So you do have the last handout in your packet is a grab and go sheet on questioning strategies and higher order type of discussion things.
It is linked, you can access all the links, but
Yep. And then the last thing is that I'm going to read this quote to you. It says, if a purpose is established beyond the classroom or school, student engagement will be higher. Why are you doing, if you ask students, why are you doing this? And their answer is reading time or writing time. Their level of motivation and achievement will be lower. So I think we're all hearing this a lot, right? That we have to find real world purposes for our students to motivate them, to get them interested in the work that they're doing. So I'd like you to find a partner at your table and discuss this question. How can you provide a real-world purpose for the work your students are doing? If you're a coach, how can you support your teachers in providing a real-world purpose for the work their students are doing? We did want to point out one thing many of you may have already heard about, and if you haven't, you probably will soon. An article that was in the New York Times recently called Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? And this article is spurring a lot of controversy everywhere, basically. It's written by someone who is not an educator. And it's basically saying that all of the research and all of the hard work that we are doing as teachers and coaches is not teaching kids how to read. And one of the things that we just wanted to take a moment to clarify for you is that the article does reference the term balanced literacy, but it's really talking about whole language in this article. When we're talking about balanced literacy here at LCN, as you know, we're referring to a balanced approach in literacy instruction that balances all the different components of reading. So if you think back to the last session when you were looking at those scales, right, and how do we balance all those different components. So if you come across this article, if an admin shares it with you, you see it on social media, just know it's not the same thing as the balanced literacy that we're talking about here. Okay? All right. So on the back of your blue packet, you have those 4 boxes. If you would just take a minute or 30 seconds to think about in what ways has the information shared in this session informed the problem of practice you were considering earlier. Maybe jot down some thoughts that you want to remember to take back to your building with you. And just take a second to do that. And then we have a quick break, right? 10 minutes.
We have a break and then close up.
So, and then we will meet back in the grand room for our closing session.